Let's start by exploring the origins of psychoanalysis. It began as a clinical technique developed by Sigmund Freud in the late 19th century. Its main goal was to treat neurosis and hysteria, conditions that were quite mysterious and difficult to understand at the time. Freud's work was groundbreaking because he approached these issues by delving into the unconscious mind. Over time, psychoanalysis has grown beyond just a therapeutic method. It has transformed into a broader theory that seeks to understand the human psyche and even culture itself. This evolution means that psychoanalysis now influences many fields, from psychology to the arts and beyond. In particular, modern psychoanalytic criticism has made a significant impact on literary studies. It helps us explore how language and the psyche are deeply intertwined. When we analyze texts through this lens, we uncover hidden layers of meaning related to subconscious drives, desires, and conflicts. This approach enriches our understanding of literature and human nature, tying back into the overall theme of how our inner worlds shape our external expressions. Let's explore the roots of the talking cure. Freud's early approach to therapy was called the talking cure because he found that patients often experienced relief from their symptoms simply by recalling and talking about repressed memories. It's fascinating how bringing these hidden thoughts to light can lead to healing. The core method relies on what we call the fundamental rule, which essentially means that patients are encouraged to say everything that comes to mind, no matter how nonsensical or trivial it might seem. This openness helps uncover unconscious thoughts that are influencing their conscious lives. These seemingly alien or disconnected ideas actually intervene in speech and act as clues, revealing deeper, unconscious processes. Connecting this to the overall theme, it shows how exploring the mind through free expression can unlock hidden truths that shape our conscious experience. Let's explore the nature of the unconscious. The unconscious is often described as both a place and a non-place, which might sound a bit abstract. Essentially, it's a domain that's completely indifferent to the constraints of reality, logic, or even contradiction. It doesn't follow the rules that govern our conscious thinking. Think of it as a hidden reservoir where repressed desires and guilty impulses reside, things we may not even be fully aware of, but that still influence us. These are impulses or feelings that we're unable, or perhaps unwilling, to fulfill consciously, but they continue to shape our thoughts and behaviors beneath the surface. What's really fascinating is that psychoanalysis suggests this unconscious activity isn't just a random or chaotic force. Instead, it plays a fundamental role in determining the structure of our normal mental life. In other words, our conscious experience and personality are deeply rooted in these unconscious processes. So, understanding the unconscious helps us see how much of what drives us remains outside our immediate awareness, yet it's essential to understanding human behavior and mental health. This idea ties directly into our broader exploration of how the mind works and why we behave the way we do. Let's talk about transference, which is often described as replaying the past. What this means is that, unconsciously, the patient reenacts feelings and experiences from their earlier life with the analyst. It's like they're reliving those emotional moments, but within the therapy setting. In this process, the analyst often becomes seen as a reincarnation of important figures from the patient's past, parents, caregivers, or other influential people. This perception creates a sort of fictional space, a safe, contained environment where these old wounds and conflicts can be explored. This space is crucial because it allows the patient to work through their problems and, importantly, to narrate their stories. It's through this reenactment and relationship that healing and understanding can happen. So, transference isn't just a distraction. It's a vital part of how therapy helps patients process their past and move forward. Dreams and the Royal Road. Freud famously called dreams the Royal Road to understanding the unconscious at work. What he meant is that our dreams can give us valuable insights into the hidden parts of our mind. You see, dreams often serve as symbolic fulfillments of unconscious wishes that are too disturbing or unacceptable to express directly. Because of this, they act as a kind of safety valve, allowing these wishes to come to the surface in a disguised form. But here's the interesting part. The unconscious mind tends to soften and distort these meanings, making dreams like symbolic texts that need to be deciphered. So, when we analyze our dreams, we're essentially trying to decode a complex language that reveals what's really going on beneath the surface. This idea fits into the overall theme of understanding how much of our behavior and thoughts are shaped by processes we're not fully aware of. Dreams, then, are a crucial window into that hidden world. Let's talk about the concept of the dream work. This term refers to the fascinating process through which our unconscious wishes, often hidden or latent, are transformed into the dream content that we eventually experience and remember. It's an intensive, almost alchemical process that takes these deep-seated desires and makes them manifest in our dreams. Now, this transformation involves several key mechanisms. One is condensation, where multiple images or ideas blend together into a single symbol or image. Think of it as a kind of compression. Different thoughts or feelings get combined into one, often complex symbol that carries multiple layers of meaning. Another important mechanism is displacement. This is where the emotional significance or meaning shifts from one object or idea to another, often less threatening or more acceptable one. It's like a kind of mental redirection that allows us to express feelings indirectly. What's really interesting is that these mechanisms, condensation and displacement, are quite similar to how language works, particularly in the use of metaphor and metonymy. In language, metaphor involves understanding one thing in terms of another, creating symbolic connections, while metonymy involves associations based on contiguity or proximity. So, when we consider the overall theme of dreams and unconscious processes, the dream work shows us how our mind creatively disguises and transforms our true wishes. It's a clever, symbolic process that bears striking resemblance to how language operates, revealing the deep connections between our thoughts, language, and unconscious mind. So, when we talk about secondary revision, we're really referring to the process of organizing the often chaotic and confusing elements of a dream into a more coherent and understandable story. Think of it as the mind's way of making sense of something that initially seems random or nonsensical. Now, this idea of revision isn't just limited to dreams. In literary theory, for example, secondary revision functions in a similar way. It smooths out contradictions within a text, making it easier for us to interpret and enjoy. It's like editing a messy draft into a polished story that's easier to consume. But here, where psychoanalysis differs, instead of smoothing things over, psychoanalysis acts as a hermeneutic of suspicion. That means it's about uncovering the hidden layers, the underlying dream work that might be hidden beneath the surface. It's like peeling back the layers to see what's really going on underneath the narrative we tell ourselves. All of this ties back to our overall theme, how the mind creates and revises stories, whether in dreams, literature, or even in our own understanding of ourselves. It's about revealing the deeper truths that often get hidden by these processes of revision and smoothing. Let's explore the fundamental motivations behind human behavior. Essentially, we are driven by what we call the pleasure principle. This means that at our core, we're motivated by the desire to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. It's like an instinctual push to maximize enjoyment and minimize discomfort. However, as we develop socially, this pleasure-seeking instinct doesn't just run unchecked. It gets repressed by what Freud called the reality principle, which helps us adapt to society's demands, like working and cooperating with others. In other words, we learn to delay gratification and prioritize social necessities to function effectively. Freud took this idea further, suggesting that civilization itself actually arises from sublimating those basic sexual instincts. Instead of acting on every impulse, we redirect that energy toward higher, socially valued goals, like art, science, or community service. This process helps us create a more organized and cohesive society, balancing our innate desires with social expectations. So, in the context of our overall discussion, these principles highlight how our innate drives are managed and transformed into the social structures that define us. It's a fascinating way to see how individual instincts shape civilization itself. Now, let's explore infantile sexuality and the concept of erotogenic zones. Freud believed that sexuality is a libidinal drive, meaning it's a kind of psychic energy that seeks satisfaction. Interestingly, he argued that this drive actually begins at the mother's breast, which he identified as the first erotogenic zone. This is where the child first experiences pleasure associated with feeding and comfort. As the child grows, the focus of erotic pleasure shifts to other parts of the body, such as the anus and the genitals. These areas become increasingly important as sources of satisfaction. What's key here is understanding that this process isn't sudden or fixed. It's a gradual organization of drives. Initially, these drives are quite flexible and spread across different parts of the body, but over time, they become more focused and structured. Connecting this to the overall theme, Freud's view helps us see how early experiences shape the development of our sexual drives. It emphasizes that our sexuality begins very early in life, even at this stage of infancy, and that the organization of these drives is a foundational part of psychological development. Now, let's explore the Oedipus complex and how it marks a crucial transition to culture. The Oedipus complex is really central to understanding how we become gendered subjects. It represents the process through which a child moves from the infant's initial, somewhat chaotic pleasure-seeking stage, what Freud called the anarchic pleasure principle, toward understanding and engaging with the social reality principle. This shift is significant because it introduces the child to the rules, norms, and authority structures of society, what we often think of as social and religious authority. Essentially, the complex signals a move from a natural, instinct-driven state to one shaped by cultural expectations. In doing so, it not only helps form individual identity, but also links personal development with societal order. This transition is fundamental because it underpins how we come to understand ourselves within a social and cultural framework, which is a key theme in our broader discussion of human development and identity formation. So, here we see how the law of the father plays a crucial role in the child's psychological development. When the father appears, he disrupts the infant's initial, narcissistic relationship with the mother. This disruption is actually the introduction of social law into the child's life. In order to recognize and accept this law, the child must repress their guilty desires, those impulses that threaten social order. This act of repression is what opens up the space of the unconscious, allowing for the development of a more complex inner world. The father, then, functions metaphorically as a lawgiver, someone who regulates desire in a way that's compatible with civilization. This process is fundamental because it connects to the overall theme of how individual psychology is shaped by social and cultural structures, how we internalize laws that help us coexist peacefully. Now, let's explore the concept of the superego and its role as the voice of conscience. The superego is essentially that inner critic we develop, often described as punitive, because it enforces the moral standards we internalize. It forms through a process called introjection, where a child absorbs the laws and authority figures around them, particularly the patriarchal law. This critical agency plays a crucial role in helping us identify with our assigned gender roles and accept the social authority that comes with them. What's fascinating here is how the superego functions to reproduce societal norms. It does this by enforcing repression of desires that don't align with these norms, helping society maintain its structure. So, in a way, our inner voice of conscience isn't just about personal morality. It's also a mechanism through which society sustains itself across generations. This connection underscores the broader theme of how individual psychology is deeply intertwined with societal expectations and power structures. Let's talk about parapraxes, or as they're often called, the slips of the tongue. These are moments when our unconscious mind unintentionally reveals itself through everyday mistakes, like saying the wrong word or bungling an action. It might seem trivial, but Freud believed these slips are actually windows into our deeper thoughts and feelings. He also made an interesting connection between jokes and the expression of unconscious content. things like suppressed desires, anxieties, or even aggression, being expressed in humor. So, what might seem like just a joke or a mistake actually carries a lot of meaning beneath the surface. This all ties back to the broader idea that everything in human culture, our language, our behaviors, even our mistakes, has a deeper significance. They're all meaningful and worth interpreting. It's a reminder that beneath the surface of our daily actions, there's a rich layer of unconscious processes at work. Neurosis, at its core, is really about the ego trying to manage unconscious desires that are too threatening to face directly. When these desires push to become conscious, the ego responds by blocking them off, creating a kind of internal conflict. This conflict doesn't just stay hidden, it manifests as symptoms, those behaviors or feelings that seem to serve a purpose. They act as a compromise, protecting us from the anxiety of our true desires, while also expressing them in a distorted way. Most often, these neuroses are rooted in unresolved childhood conflicts, especially those related to the Oedipal moment. That's a critical point because it highlights how early family dynamics and childhood experiences shape our inner struggles. So, understanding neurosis helps us see how these internal conflicts are not just random. They're deeply connected to our developmental history. This idea fits into the broader theme of how our unconscious influences our conscious life and behaviors. Let's talk about psychosis and the break with reality. In this state, the ego, which normally manages and represses our desires, is unable to do so. Instead, it falls under the sway of these unconscious urges. This rupture or break causes a person to lose touch with what's real, leading them to construct their own delusional realities. In the language of schizophrenia, these unconscious desires tend to surge up unexpectedly, flooding the mind with riddling associations that can seem confusing or nonsensical. This process highlights how, when the ego can't keep desires in check, reality becomes distorted. It connects to the larger theme of how psychological structures influence our perception of reality and how disruptions in these processes can lead to mental health challenges. Now, let's delve into Freud's concept of the death drive, also known as thanatos. In his later work, Freud introduced this idea to explain a fundamental human drive. Essentially, the death drive represents our subconscious desire to return to a state of inanimacy, to undo the complexities of life and consciousness. It's like an impulse to rejoin the missing object, which in a way signifies a kind of unconscious longing for nothingness. What's really fascinating is that this drive exists in a tragic contradiction with eros, the life or sexual energy that builds up over time, creating connections and growth. So, on one hand, we have the push towards life, connection, and creation, and on the other, a counterforce pulling us back towards inanimation and dissolution. Understanding this tension helps us see the human condition as a constant struggle between these two drives, eros and thanatos, which shape much of our behavior and internal conflicts. It's a profound reminder of the duality at the core of our existence, tying back to the overall theme of human nature's complex dynamics. Let's take a look at how early applied psychoanalysis approached art. Back then, critics would often diagnose the mental health of the artist by interpreting their works as symptoms of inner frustration or psychological conflicts. For example, Freud's biography of Leonardo da Vinci is a classic case. He suggested that the different stages in Leonardo's art and life reflected a regression to childhood fixations. This biographical approach was quite influential because it led to a whole repertoire of symbols, images, and motifs that were believed to reveal the artist's true soul or essence. Essentially, the artwork was seen as a window into the creator's inner world. This approach helped shape early psychoanalytic criticism by connecting the artist's personal history with their creative output, which aligns with the broader theme of how psychoanalysis interprets human expression. So, here we see a significant shift in psychoanalytic criticism. Instead of focusing solely on analyzing the author's intentions or biographical details, there's now a greater emphasis on examining the formal mechanisms within the text itself. What do I mean by formal mechanisms? Well, it's about how the text is constructed, the language, the structure, the visual elements, and how these elements reveal unconscious processes. This approach really highlights what I like to call the unconscious dexterity of the mind, how it skillfully transforms underlying motives into verbal and visual forms that we can interpret. What's especially important here is the idea that the true meaning of a text isn't just in its explicit content or the author's biography, but rather in how that content is produced, the choices of language, imagery, style, all of which serve as windows into unconscious drives. So, in this perspective, we're shifting our focus from what the text says on the surface to how it communicates beneath the surface. This aligns with the overall theme of understanding literature and art as expressions of deeper psychological mechanisms. Now, let's explore the Lacanian turn and its focus on language and the subject. Jacques Lacan offered a fascinating reinterpretation of Freud, emphasizing that our understanding of the human psyche is deeply intertwined with language. He believed that our sense of self is not a fixed entity, but is fundamentally shaped through our interactions with language. Lacan argued that the subject is divided, meaning that we are never fully unified or whole in ourselves. Instead, we are constantly relating to others through processes of signification, where words and symbols carry meaning. This process creates a split within us because our identity is constructed through these linguistic exchanges. What makes this so compelling is that Lacan's return to Freud highlights that the subject is actually an effect of language itself. In other words, who we are is shaped by the language we use and the social meanings we internalize. This perspective is crucial because it shifts the focus from a purely biological or psychological understanding of the individual to one that emphasizes the role of language as a fundamental force in shaping our identity and subjectivity. It ties into the overall theme of the presentation by illustrating how language isn't just a tool for communication, but a central fabric of human existence and self-formation. So on this slide, we're exploring the idea that the unconscious is structured like a language. Lacan's famous formula really captures this, suggesting that our unconscious operates according to linguistic principles. He believed that unconscious processes, such as condensation and displacement, follow what he calls the law of the signifier. What does that mean? Essentially, it implies that the way our mind organizes and expresses thoughts is similar to how language functions. Psychic movements, those unconscious shifts and associations, mirror rhetorical figures like metaphor and metonymy. This is a crucial point because it links the structure of the unconscious to the structure of language itself. It also helps us understand that our unconscious isn't just a chaotic jumble of thoughts, but rather follows certain logical and linguistic patterns. So, in the broader context of our presentation, this idea underscores how language shapes our mental processes and vice versa. It's a fascinating way to see the mind as something deeply intertwined with the structures of language we use every day. Let's talk about the register of the imaginary. This is a fascinating concept because it describes a state of being where there's really no clear boundary between the subject, that's us, and the external world around us. In this state, our sense of self is often formed through what we might call narcissistic identifications. Essentially, we identify with certain images or representations in the world, and these become a sort of mirror for our ego. Now, a key point here is the idea of misrecognition. This is where things get interesting. It means that we perceive a unity or wholeness, something pleasing and harmonious, but in reality, this unity isn't truly there. It's an illusion that our mind creates, a kind of mental fabrications that make us feel connected or complete, even though the actual structure of our being is more fragmented. Connecting this to the overall theme of the presentation, understanding this register of the imaginary helps us see how our ego develops not through authentic self-awareness, but through these images and misperceptions. It highlights the importance of recognizing how our sense of self can be built on illusions, which influence our perceptions and interactions with the world. Let's talk about the mirror stage, which is a really fascinating concept. This is the moment when an infant first recognizes themselves in a reflection, typically around 6 to 18 months. It's a pivotal point because, for the first time, the child identifies with a unified self-image, something that feels complete and coherent. Now, this identification leads to the formation of what we call a fictional ideal ego. This is essentially the image of ourselves that we aspire to, a sense of a stable and unified self that we cling to, especially when faced with the chaos of our internal and external worlds. But here's the interesting part. This unity is actually an illusion. Despite feeling like we have a cohesive self, in reality, we are radically dispersed. Our sense of self is constantly shaped and influenced by various discourses, social contexts, and internal dialogues. So, while the mirror stage helps us develop a sense of identity, it's important to remember that this sense of unity is, in a way, a constructed fiction. It's a useful illusion, but it doesn't fully capture the complex, dispersed nature of our true self. This idea ties into the broader theme of how our identities are formed and maintained, often through illusions of coherence that mask deeper fragments. Let's explore the concept of the symbolic order and the phallus. The symbolic order is essentially the pre-existing framework of social and sexual roles that a child enters into through language. It's like the underlying structure that shapes how we see ourselves and others in society. Lacan identified the phallus as a key signifier within this structure, a sort of privileged symbol that marks the division between the child's initial sense of wholeness, or imaginary fullness, and the reality of social differentiation. To truly accept their place within the symbolic, a child must give up their earlier bonds to the mother, which represents a kind of necessary renunciation. This process is crucial because it allows the child to navigate social roles and language, shaping their identity within the larger social order. So, in the broader context of our discussion, understanding the symbolic order and the role of the phallus helps us see how our sense of self is intertwined with language, social norms, and symbolic signifiers that organize our social reality. Desire, at its core, comes from a fundamental sense of lack that we can never fully access or understand through language or signification. It's this elusive gap that drives us. Lacan called this gap the object petty, which can be thought of as a universal lost cause, something forever out of reach, yet constantly setting the wheels of symbolic exchange in motion. What this means is that we're always searching for objects or experiences to fill this void, but none can truly satisfy it. Instead, we chase after substitutes, trying to plug the hole at the very heart of our being. This concept ties into the larger theme of desire, how it's never fully satisfied, always pushing us forward. It's a key idea because it highlights how our longing is structured by this inherent lack, shaping much of human behavior and interaction. So here we see the idea that the subject is divided, and this is a crucial point. Essentially, there's an insuperable gap between the I who is speaking and the I that is being spoken about. It's like there's a fundamental split within us. Lacan emphasized this by revising Descartes' famous statement, "Instead of I think, therefore I am," he proposed, "I am not where I think, and I think where I am not." This highlights how our sense of self and our speech are never perfectly aligned. This concept is often called the scandal of enunciation, meaning that we can never truly know if the person speaking is the same as the person or subject being spoken of. It raises important questions about identity and the nature of selfhood. How much of who we are is actually accessible or knowable through language? So, in the context of our overall theme, it reminds us that the act of speaking and the act of being are inherently split, which has profound implications for understanding subjectivity and communication. So here we're talking about the real, which is often called the unattainable kernel. It's this idea of a core reality that constantly eludes our shared understanding. No matter how much we try to symbolize or grasp it, it remains just out of reach. It's like a hard kernel that resists all forms of signification, meaning language and symbols just can't fully capture it. Instead, it manifests to us as something traumatic or disruptive when we encounter it directly. Art, then, has a special role here. It tries to perform or reveal the structure of desire by getting close to this impossible thing. So, in the bigger picture, This concept reminds us of the limits of representation and how art acts as a bridge to that elusive core of reality that we can never completely possess or understand. Let's talk about feminism and psychoanalysis. Feminist critics initially discredited Freud because of his concept of penis envy, which they saw as phallocentric, meaning it centered too much on male genitalia as a symbol of power. However, later theorists like Juliet Mitchell took a different stance. They argued that psychoanalysis isn't just about reinforcing patriarchy. Instead, it can be a useful tool to analyze and understand how patriarchy functions. Moving to Lacanian theory, this approach has been used to show that sexual difference, what makes men and women distinct, is rooted in language itself, rather than purely biological anatomy. These ideas are important because they challenge traditional views and help us see gender as something constructed through language and social structures, aligning with our overall theme of questioning established narratives about gender and identity. Let's explore the concepts of the semiotic and the symbolic, as Julia Kristeva describes them. The semiotic refers to pre-Oedipal drives, which are more instinctual and maternal in nature. These drives are not structured by language, but instead manifest as rhythmic disruptions within speech. Think of them as the more primal, emotional undercurrents that challenge the rational, ordered aspect of language. On the other hand, the symbolic is all about social language. It's the structured, rule-governed system we use to communicate within society. This is where language becomes a tool for social organization and identity. Now, an important point is that poetic language serves as a special space where the semiotic can break through the law of the father, which represents the societal norms and rules. It's in poetry that we often see these primal, rhythmic disruptions come to the surface, challenging the strict boundaries of conventional language. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding the semiotic and the symbolic helps us see how language is not just about conveying information, but also about expressing deeper drives, emotions, and even resistance to social norms. Trauma theory explores events that are so overwhelming, they can't be easily processed or integrated by our usual mental functions. These are moments that shake our sense of normalcy and leave a deep imprint. Freud introduced the idea of Nachtraglichkeit, or afterwardsness, which is a really important concept here. It suggests that the significance of a traumatic event is often understood only in hindsight, after we've had time to reflect. In other words, the meaning or impact of a trauma can actually develop over time, rather than being immediately clear. This leads us to a fascinating point. Often, memory can become the cause of trauma, rather than just a simple record of what happened. So in trauma studies, we see that our understanding of events is complex. It's shaped by how we retrospectively interpret them, which ties into the overall theme of how narratives and memory influence our experience of the past. Psychoanalysis as praxis is really about seeing it as a science that's deeply committed to helping human beings break free from what holds them back from true fulfillment. It's not just about understanding the mind, it's about transforming lives. It serves as a practice that allows us to explore how we've constructed our own worlds and identities over time. This process of self-exploration helps us see the underlying patterns and beliefs that shape our experiences. Ultimately, psychoanalysis offers us the opportunity to re-engage with the real relations of a world that's often troubled or in flux. It's about reconnecting with what's genuine and finding ways to navigate and perhaps even heal the complex realities we face today. This ties back to our overall theme, how understanding ourselves can lead to more meaningful engagement with the world around us.